So that's the most important.
How you doing? Officially say hello. How are you?
Zane, of course. Yeah, I don't know. We've met before, yeah. Yeah.
Thanks for doing this. I know.
Thank you for the invite.
Good to have you out here. How long are you in town?
16 hours. I got to get back home for Carbondale Mountain
Oh, man.
tomorrow.
Hey, not a bad reason
What a
to go
tough
back.
play. What a tough play.
We'd love for you guys to come.
Carbondale Mountain Fair.
Lucy and I are on the planning committee, so.
Oh my God.
Man.
We'll have fun. For sure. Absolutely.
Did we lose a person here?
I think so. I have not met, I haven't seen him. Good morning, everyone. It is so exciting to be here and to see everyone in person. My name is Christy Goldfuss. I'm the Senior Vice President for Energy and Environment Policy at the Center for American Progress. This is a really exciting discussion that we're going to have today, and so timely. I mean, we live in Washington, D.C., and we're surrounded by smoke coming from fires out west and in Canada. It's something that I don't think I ever imagined that I would see. Extreme weather is happening more and more, and people are experiencing it now. Climate change is happening now. Here in DC, we're always talking about the horse trading. What's happening? What's on? The BIF, the Build Back Better plan. I mean, there's so many different acronyms, no one can keep up. We sometimes forget that real people are experiencing climate change now. So today's discussion, I couldn't be more excited to introduce all of these senators and members of Congress who were joined by their own constituents here to share their stories, to remind us it's not just about the horse trading. It's really about the impacts on people's lives. So we have a lot of speakers today. We're going to move very quickly to hear everyone's stories. But I want to start out west. I'm going to start today with we're going to start with Congressman Neguse, who is on the Select Committee for the Climate Crisis and is in his second term and has been a climate champion from the very beginning. So, Congressman, welcome.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Christy, for the introduction. And of course, thank you for hosting this incredibly important and timely event. And it's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to join you today. I represent Colorado's 2nd Congressional District. It's northern Colorado in the Central Mountains. And back home, this has been a rough week for my community. As our senator knows, in my district, in the Poudre Canyon, my constituents are facing terrible flash flooding. One life has been lost, several individuals are missing, many more have been forced to evacuate. Flash flooding warnings have now been issued for the Cameron Peak burn scar and these troublesome burn scar, which were the first and second largest wildfires in the history of Colorado, 136 years, both of which happened simultaneously in my district last year. These extreme weather events for communities in my district and for communities across the country are inescapable. They are getting worse, and they are forcing first responders, firefighters, and families to use every tool they have to respond and to survive these weather events. It is time for Congress to take bold action to protect our communities, to protect our country, and ultimately to protect our planet. According to FEMA, every dollar that we spend on disaster mitigation saves us $6 in the long run. It is worth it, and we cannot afford not to act. Americans can't afford to keep waiting until the next disaster strikes. They deserve generational investments in resilience to protect them from climate risks and costs, investments like those outlined in President Biden's American Jobs Plan. We have an action plan to build back better, to create millions of clean energy jobs, to tackle the climate crisis and provide our communities with the support that they need to build back from the natural disasters they have already experienced. Earlier this week, as chair of the Public Lands Subcommittee in the House, we held a hearing on the Civilian Climate Corps. We are leading a broad coalition of lawmakers in the House and in the Senate who are behind this proposal because they believe, and we believe, it is a bold vision that will meet this moment, to put hundreds of thousands of Americans back to work, restoring our lands and our communities, reforestation, wildfire resiliency and mitigation, ultimately tackling climate change. So this is our moment. We have a huge opportunity to get this right if we think creatively and we act boldly. And with that, there's no one who's acted more boldly, in my view, someone who has spent his entire career trying to take action in the fight against climate change with much success. And that is my good friend and colleague from the state of Colorado, our state senior senator, Senator Michael Bennett.
Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate it. And Joe Neguse and I have spent more time than either he or I would want to have spent with people who have faced the disasters that have been caused by climate in his district. And my heart goes out for the people who have lost their lives and who are missing today because of the flash flooding in Joe's district, because of what happened in Poudre Canyon this week, because the burn scar there was vulnerable to heavy monsoon rains. And we all knew it was going to happen. And the amazing thing about what Colorado is now facing is last year we had the 3 largest wildfires in our state's history, all in the same year. And snow or the fires were still going on when the snow fell. That's never happened before in anybody's memory. And what that means is people can't do the kind of landscape restoration or mitigation that's required, and it makes communities very vulnerable when the runoff happens in the spring. That's what we're facing today. So anybody who thinks that this is all speculative or somehow far out into the future, this is having a profound effect in lost lives today in Colorado, and is having a dramatic effect on our economy today. And that's why the state of Colorado is reacting to it. We were the first state to regulate fugitive methane. We've got a utility, our main utility is going carbon-free, and we've got a commitment to managing water in our state and in the West in a way that, under very difficult circumstances, is at least responsible. So we need Washington to act. And we need Washington to act now in this infrastructure legislation, be bold about it. When it comes to forests, we've got provisions in this bill to do forest mitigation and watershed protection that will create millions of jobs in the Rocky Mountain West. And as the congressman was saying, our current policy is fiscally completely irresponsible. Penny wise, pound foolish. It costs $50,000 an acre to fight fires. It costs $1,500 an acre to do the mitigation that's required. And that's what we're proposing to do in this legislation, create jobs in our communities. So at the heart of all of this for us is water. And Catherine Cortez Masto knows that as well as anybody. And Zane Kessler from the Colorado River District is here today to talk about what the work looks like on the ground when you're dealing with a resource that is diminishing every single day because of climate change and is creating enormous tensions and challenges. So with that, let me turn it over to Zane.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Congressman. Appreciate your having me here today. The late Congressman Wayne Aspinall famously said that in the West, when you touch water, you touch everything. And in Western Colorado, that could not be more true. Water is everything. The Colorado River is arguably the most valuable natural resource, not only to the state of Colorado, but to the 7 states and 2 nations that depend on it. More than 40 million people live downstream of the region that I represent, which produces 75% of the river's natural flow, which comes principally from snowpack. But Colorado's western slope and the entire Colorado River Basin are continuing to suffer from the effects of a multi-decadal drought. The basin is experiencing some of the worst drought conditions in recorded history and has been for more than 21 years. Unfortunately, this year is no different. This year is what we're calling the year of superlatives, in which adjectives such as worst and driest and first time ever have been regularly used to describe the situation. It's well documented that Western Colorado, the headwaters of the American Nile, the Colorado River, is at the epicenter of a region that is experiencing far more than normal, significantly above average temperature rise. Counties from throughout my district have seen more than 4-degree Fahrenheit rise in the last 100 years. And when you do the math, we know from solid science that for every 1 degree of Fahrenheit rise that we see, we experience between 3 and 5% 25% decrease in stream flow. That means that many of the agricultural communities that have thrived on the western slope for more than a century are dealing with 15 to 18% less water than they were 100 years ago. At the same time, we're seeing significant population growth, and the demands on the river continue to increase. So there is no debate that climate change presents a real and meaningful and unacceptable risk to our way of life, our economies, and our communities on the western slope and throughout the American Southwest. As both of the congressman and senator mentioned, last summer we experienced the 3 largest wildfires in history, in state history, in brief succession, one after the other. Watersheds and water infrastructure on both sides of the Continental Divide were seriously impacted, resulting in hundreds of millions of dollars in restoration and mitigation expenses. Nationwide, it's estimated that wildfires in 2020 cost $16.5 billion and $67.3 billion over the last 5 years. The list goes on, and I don't have time to dive into all the other negative externalities that we're seeing, but all of this is why Senator Bennett and the Colorado River District's General Manager, Andy Mueller, brought together Coloradans from agricultural, water, local government, tribal government, education, environment, and business communities to put together a framework to come up with durable solutions that address the challenges we face. And I'm here to say that if Coloradans from all walks of life, if from all political opinions can come together on this issue, leaders in Washington should have no problem doing the same. We need action on our forests. These are the largest reservoirs that we have. It is our natural infrastructure. Senator Bennett's Outdoor Restoration Partnership Act is, I think, a shining example of the type of moonshot investments that we need. $60 billion over 10 years to help us just keep up with the restoration issues that are facing our watersheds and our livelihoods. So there's a huge opportunity for Washington to make meaningful investments in protecting our climate and building climate resilience this year. We cannot wait any longer. Taking action is urgent and long overdue. Our communities, our economies, and quite frankly, our way of life in the West depend on it. So thank you both for having me. I wish we were here to discuss a more uplifting topic. So.
Mr. Kessler, thank you for traveling here. And it's just a huge reminder that we are not talking about future generations. These are impacts that we are seeing right now. Moving from Colorado to a state near and dear to my heart, the state of Nevada, we have another climate champion, Senator Cortez Masto, who lives at the intersection of climate, public lands, and extreme weather. Thank you for joining us this morning,
Thank
Senator.
you. Thank you. It's great to join my colleagues and all the special guests this morning. Let me just say this. Mark Twain famously said, in the West, whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting. And what you find here, particularly what we're talking about in Western states, is not only this nexus. What we have right now is the drought and wildfires. And it's devastating to our communities. Scientists have long predicted a hotter planet and more extreme weather conditions, and now these changes are here. In 2020 alone, Nevada had 800 wildfires. 800. And we're seeing another devastating fire season in the West. This summer, we've already seen devastating fires like the Beckworth Complex, Dixie, and the Tamarack fires, which are impacting us now. Let me just give you an example how often this occurs. I was home for the July break, and I was traveling through northern Nevada, and literally was driving into Carson City, a storm that quick, doing now in legislation in the infrastructure package to address the issues around the wildfires, but also the drought. There's legislation that I've introduced with my colleagues on the House side to also focus on water recycling, large-scale water recycling projects that will put new water back into the Colorado River to help us address the drought that we see in the western states as well. There is an opportunity here really for all of us to work together, but we have to recognize this extreme weather. Listen to the scientists, understand what's happening, and plan for it, and make sure that we're all working together to federal, state, and local level. I am so pleased. My special guest today is the fire chief from the Reno Fire Department. He is somebody that I've had the opportunity to work with over the last several years. The first thing I did when I became a senator was pull in all of our fire department, all of our men and women that work and address the wildfires we see in the West, to figure out how we can work together to make sure they have the resources they need, but most importantly, to make sure we're saving lives, not only for the men and women who work in the fire department, but for those who live every single day in the West that are dealing with these wildfires. So I am pleased to invite him to talk a little bit about what he is seeing here, particularly in the Western states, and the work that they are doing in Nevada and across our borders as well. Fire Chief, thank you for joining.
Thank you very much, Senator. I appreciate that. My name is Dave Cochran. I'm the Reno Fire Chief, as the Senator mentioned, and I appreciate having the opportunity to say a few words. Could probably talk all morning about this subject because there's so much going on, but I think it's important that we understand the scope of what's happening out there. The Senator mentioned the Tamarack Fire. That's about 12 miles from my home. It's about the size of Washington, D.C. North in Oregon, there's the Bootleg Fire, which is 10 times that size. That still is only a fraction of the 10 million acres that burned last year. So wildfire, the seasons are getting longer, the fires are getting bigger, they're getting more intense, and we can tie that directly to climate, certainly. Fuel moistures, or fuels being the grasses, brush, trees that are potential fuel for the fire, when those drop, we are more susceptible to fire. When there's hotter temperatures, as the science has dictated, has demonstrated, that basically sucks the moisture out of the fuel. When you have dry fuels, they catch fire easier, they burn faster, they burn longer, and they burn hotter. We are already at preparedness level 5 nationwide. That's a measure of our capability to fight fires. That's the highest. It means that we've reached the point where we have tapped out all our resources. We've used as much as we can, and we're not at peak fire season yet. So what can we do about it? It's going to take a cooperative, collaborative approach, like a lot of people have talked about already. The Senator has been a leader in that area. Back in 2019, she organized the first Nevada Wildfire Summit, which brought all stakeholders together, not just firefighters, but property owners, ranchers, water managers, all the different stakeholders, to talk about how we can work together. She spearheaded a number of efforts, the Alert Tahoe wildfire cameras, which is a prevention method that places cameras in strategic locations to monitor high-risk areas which have the risk or the higher risk of wildfire starts. And then, of course, the Wildfire Support Act, Western Wildfire Support Act. The 3 tenets of that act are extremely important: prevention, suppression, and recovery. We get hung up, or we get focused on suppression, and certainly that's important, but those prevention efforts, including the use of drones, which the Senator I know is a huge supporter of. We're working on a program at the Reno Fire Department to use drones to monitor those high-risk areas. And then one of the elements that goes under-recognized, which was mentioned already, recovery. When you have those wildfires that leave those burn scars that are susceptible to erosion, flooding, all the different things that can happen that are mitigated by the forest and the vegetation, we need to address those as well. So there's a tremendous amount of resources that are needed to address this problem, and I'm very pleased and happy to be here to support the idea and the goal of moving forward toward that goal. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief, for sharing your story. Moving from Nevada to Oregon, I'm so happy to have a climate champion and lead sponsor of one of the major climate pieces of legislation moving through the Congress, the Clean Energy for America Act, Senator Wyden.
Thank you very much. My colleagues, Senator Cortez Masto, Senator Bennett, have said it so well. So no filibuster from me. And I'm going to get a chance to make an important introduction. But let me see if I can summarize what we Westerners are saying about fires. These are not your grandfather's fires. They are vastly more powerful. They're weather changing. And my biggest fear is the prospect that this year in the West, we will have multiple big fires all across the West at exactly the same time, challenging resources in what is really an unprecedented fashion. So that's why we're all glad to be here. You've got 3% of the United States Senate here in just the last 10 minutes. And it is so important to us that you get a chance to hear what this really means on the ground. And so Oregon Mayor Darby Ayers Flood is here from Talent, Oregon, a wonderful small community that was hit by one of these fires, and it was like they were hit by a wrecking ball. When we got a chance, the delegation, to get in there, basically communities where I had been essentially were ash. There was nothing there. It was ash in places where, like my colleague from Nevada, we'd been, you visit with people, you have coffee hours. That's what it looked like. Now, I think with 2,800 homes and businesses, gone, the mayor, Mayor Darby, as I like to call her, Mayor Darby Ayers Flood, they're rebuilding. They still have a long way to go, but make no mistake about it, and my Western colleagues will say the same thing. We in the West are resilient. We're tough. We're scrappy. We know how to come back. So we're going to do it. The question really is, all our bills are fundamentally about getting more serious about fire prevention. You bet we're going to give the firefighters the tools they need, the technology they need, the drones, the UAVs, this sort of thing. But we got to get much more serious about fire prevention. And where is my friend the mayor? Oh, very good.
She's joining us via Zoom.
I was looking all over cyberspace, and there is the mayor. Mayor, you've been a tireless advocate for Oregon and our small communities. Now you've got a national audience. Tell it the way you've told it to me, because it is a powerful story that America needs to hear, and thanks for getting up early at home.
Thank you, Senator Wyden, and I'm really pleased to be here to be a part of this really important discussion. I'm still in Oregon. We're still working very hard. I just couldn't get away for any time to come and join you personally, but I'm really grateful to be here this morning by Zoom. My name is Darby Ayers Flood. I'm the mayor of the city of Talent. We're a city of about 6,500 people and very near the California border, deep in Southern Oregon. 10 months ago, the Alameda fire destroyed a full third of our town. And when Senator Wyden described it as ash, it really was the most incredible sight I've ever seen. Literally, a third of our town was burned to the ground. And while there weren't any, there were only 3 deaths, very, very fortunately, only 3 deaths in the whole region. Talent barely evacuated the fire, literally with flames in the rearview mirrors and in some cases, fires at people's back as they were escaping on foot. It was an unbelievable experience. Talent lost dozens of businesses, but we lost 724 of our homes. And, when I say that to people, I also want to remind, keep it in front of mind that when we talk about 724 homes, we're talking about an animate object, filled with families and life and homes, our neighbors, our loved ones, who literally were escaping for their lives. And are now displaced. And among the displaced are the most vulnerable. In our case, that fire went through our community like an X-Acto knife and carved out the low-income housing and a lot of our senior housing. And so left to fend for themselves in less than one day were our seniors, our low-income folks, and almost our entire Latinx community. And these are people without resources. So I'm here to say 10 months later after the fire that rescue and recovery takes too long and it's way too hard. And it's impacting people who are having, the least ability to recover for themselves. And so there's so much more to this discussion than just mitigating climate chaos, which is where we're actually at. To put some context to this, we have a school district that serves not just my city, Talent, but the city north of me, Phoenix, another small city who was also decimated by this fire. And a full 30% of the students were just displaced and disappeared from our school. So you can see that when they're not attending school and they're out in the region, the threat to not having those folks come back threatens not only our community and the makeup of our community, but also places like the school district and its ability to move forward. And those are the kind of incremental impacts that just keep coming after an event like this. One of the biggest challenges we're facing is finding housing and shelter. So we, like the rest of the nation, we're having an incredible housing shortage to begin with. And then this fire, and this is something that we all need to think about when we're talking about climate chaos, is with such an incredible shortage of housing across the nation, when thousands and hundreds of homes are displaced, where are you going to put them after that? And so it's, there's no end to the planning, no end to the strategies that we need to come up with, more than just trying to fight, the climate chaos that's already on us. 5 years ago, Talent installed a clean energy action plan into our comprehensive plan. We were so proud. We were one of the first in the nations to put one in our comprehensive plan. And we really felt like we were ahead of the game. We sort of naively believed that somehow was going to inoculate us from any real challenges a small city might have to face. And I think we were very naive to believe that the climate chaos was just around the corner. In fact, we were just seeing the beginnings of what we now know, what we now call wildfire season. Wildfire season is actually a thing in the West Coast. And for the last 5 years, it's not only impacted communities like Paradise and Redding and Santa Clara and other cities that are in Oregon, but it also impacts us in the form of unbelievable air quality indexes on a summer after summer after summer. In the last 5 years, we've had indexes regularly over 400 on the index, which that is extreme unhealthy. So it's causing health issues. It's causing economic collapse in some communities that rely on tourism. The exponential effect of these wildfires can't be overstated. And so to add insult to injury, as we have 650 people still in hotel rooms 10 months later, trying to find housing and trying to find shelter, we had an extreme heat wave that killed 166 people in Oregon in this month. And, so the consequences are already deadly. We are already in climate chaos. And from our view, what we need to do is work, we need to work much, much faster and much more aggressively on mitigating climate change. But we're now recognizing in our own community that we're in this, and we need to start working on not only strategies to work on mitigation, but also really robust and aggressive strategies to rescue people when these things happen. And in many, many ways, we're just not prepared to rescue huge amounts of people and get them sheltered and get them safe. And we've done a remarkable job with the support of our senators and our state representatives, but we're in dire straits still, and so we're here to ask that we not only start to work on climate mitigation, but that we also work on very robust rescue strategies from climate chaos. Thank you for giving me a few minutes to talk about the tragedies in Talent. We're racing for more to come. We know that this is not anywhere near some kind of curve. We see this getting worse every year. And so we need to work harder. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, for your leadership. Now moving to, thank you, Senator. Moving to the Midwest, to a champion who is leading the fight to transition to 100% clean power. Turn it over to Senator Tina Smith.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks to those of you who traveled a long way to be with us today. And thanks to Climate Power for organizing today's event. And I'm especially glad to be here today with my fellow Minnesotan, Josna Harris, with Climate Generation, a Will Steger legacy. So this is a full circle moment for me. Before I came to the Senate, I was Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota with Governor Mark Dayton. And Will Steger, a renowned Arctic explorer and our friend and advisor on climate issues, brought into our office a group of young activists who were powerful advocates for taking action on our climate crisis. So we met in the big, ornate, and frankly pretty imposing governor's reception room at the Minnesota State Capitol, and we gathered in a circle, and these young people told me why they were so passionate about climate action and why it was so important to them to protect our planet today and their future tomorrow. And they asked me why it was important to me and what I was going to do about it. What they said was so simple and so true. They said, you have the power to do something, so what are you going to do? And I never forgot that. And I was inspired and moved to action. And today in the Senate, I'm still working to take transformational steps to address our present climate crisis. We have to take action now. And for me, this is personal. My grandson Ari is just a little over a year old, and I want him to remember snow in Minnesota. I want him to live in a world that is safe, that is healthy for everyone, where there is opportunities that are widely shared. So it's personal for me, but it is personal for everyone. And people I know are ready to take action. I'm thinking of Minnesotans, and I'm thinking especially right now of Minnesota farmers who are dealing with yet another year of drought that is spreading inexorably throughout the state, affecting not only farmers, but also timber and logging in Minnesota's North Country. I'm thinking about fires in the Boundary Waters. You think of the Boundary Waters as one of the most precious of canoe areas. I mean, it's water everywhere, yet we have fires there. And on Minnesota's beautiful North Shore of Lake Superior, Gooseberry Falls has slowed to nothing but a trickle because of the impacts of climate change. Minnesotans know that climate change is real, it is a current, present danger, and we must take action to address it. This is our moment. This is our moment to make the change that we need. And the place to start is in Congress. And it is starting, I think, by passing the strong climate legislation that we need to pass this summer. Now, I am working hard to make sure that that climate action includes a clean electricity standard, which is a powerful, practical, progressive tool to get us to net zero carbon emissions as soon as possible. And I'd like to see us get to 80% by 2030. We can do this. It is a big challenge, but choosing this future will protect our health, it will protect our livelihoods as we have seen, it will create jobs, and it will put us on the forefront of research and innovation in this country, and it will make our country more fair and more just. So I want to thank you all for being here today. I want to thank also the young activists who are leading the way for all of us every single day. And I'm grateful for the chance to introduce Josna Harris. Josna is the Director of Community Engagement at Climate Generation, a Will Steger legacy, which is a national nonprofit based in Minnesota dedicated to climate education and advocacy. And she is the co-editor of this incredible book, Eyewitness, which is a collection of stories of Minnesotans' experiences and reflections on climate change in our state. Thank you for being with us, Josna.
Thank you so much, Senator Smith, and thank you for your leadership. We are incredibly grateful to you. Again, my name is Josna Harris, and I'm with Climate Generation, a Will Steger legacy. My dad came to Minnesota in the 1960s as part of his American dream. In the early days, he would bike to work, even in the winter when the snowdrifts were higher than he could have imagined. He would send letters back to India to tell family what seemed like tall tales of our epic Minnesota winters. Winters that are now disappearing, because Minnesota is among the top states for the fastest warming winters in the nation. In Minnesota, climate change is affecting our economy, traditions, and way of life, and we are all witnessing it. Recently, Climate Generation published the book Eyewitness, Minnesota Voices on Climate Change, written by people all across the state sharing their lived experiences. And last session, we delivered a copy of the book to every Minnesota policymaker as a call for bold action. Our testimonies tell us that we are out of time. Extreme weather events fueled by climate change are more frequent and intense. Supercharged storms causing 1,000-year flooding, wildfires, and drought. This June was the hottest and longest stretch of early season drought in Minnesota history. And as a small-scale organic farmer myself, this is something that I have felt personally in my daily worry for our crops. In the midst of extreme weather events, how communities rebuild also matters. In 2011, an F1 tornado tore through North Minneapolis, where my father-in-law lives. The storm displaced hundreds, left thousands without power for days, and decimated the urban forest. That day, my father-in-law was in his house when the tornado ripped his roof right off his home, bringing back PTSD from his time in the Army. Climbing up on the roof and laying out tarps, the true lasting memory was in the aftermath of the storm, realizing that help was not on the way. After the storm passed, it was evident that it was up to the community to come together and support each other. North Minneapolis is a low-income area with predominantly Black and brown communities, and this is often the experience of marginalized communities that lack the resources to deal with climate change and yet are bearing the brunt of the impacts. Minnesota holds many of the worst racial disparities across health, housing, income, and education. Climate change amplifies all these disparities. The opportunity is now to prioritize climate justice and rebuild our economy in a way that is rooted in community voices and solutions. My dad raised me to be a proud Minnesotan because the Minnesota mindset that we can get through anything matched his own value for hard work, grit, and determination against all odds. And he instilled this in me. And I must believe that we can work hard to address the climate crisis too. We have less than a decade to do this critical work. And I am reminded of this when I look at the faces of my children who are 16 and 13, who had their summer camp in the Boundary Waters Wilderness area this summer disrupted by nearby wildfires. It breaks my heart to know that this unpredictability is our new normal. To our legislators, the time is now for you to lead legislation that centers climate justice in clean energy, transportation, education, health, and more, and that you hold the voices of the communities that you serve as you make these critical decisions on behalf of all of us. And with that, I would like to say thank you to Senator Tina Smith for leading in this fight. We are so incredibly proud to have you representing us.
Thank you, Josna, for all of your work and for this incredible book. I took a quick look and it's amazing. So from Minnesota to my home state, Connecticut, where my parents actually moved from the coast in Darien to get away from sea level rise. So Senator Murphy, please talk about a different type of extreme weather and what we experience in Connecticut.
Well, thank you very much, Christy. Thanks to Climate Action for inviting me here. I'm really excited to introduce my guest, Kurt Johnson, to all of you. We're appropriately talking a lot about our children and grandchildren. I just came back from a trip out west hiking and camping with my 12-year-old and 9-year-old, and our entire week was dominated by a discussion about climate change because every single day we were hiking and camping, the temperatures in Utah and Nevada were 100 degrees or higher. We finished flying out of Las Vegas on a day that reached 117. My kids, though, don't need to care about climate change because they're visitors to the West. They care about climate change because they're citizens of Connecticut. And it just pains me that my 12-year-old has to spend time thinking and worrying about what adults are going to do to save his planet. To his mind, the entire infrastructure bill should be about climate because he knows the implications for him and his generation if we do nothing. In Connecticut, we sit on top of a multi-trillion-dollar asset, Long Island Sound. It powers our economy. It defines the culture of our state. There is no more important economic and ecological asset to our state than Long Island Sound. But Long Island Sound is warming at a rate 4 times that of the ocean by which it sits, with grave consequences for our state. Most of our low-income population lives within a mile or two of Long Island Sound. And so with more ferocious storms and rising seas, it is first and foremost people that are on Medicaid, people with complicated healthcare problems, people that don't have a dime in the bank to deal with an emergency who are most often affected. Marina Village is a low-income housing project in Bridgeport that for years was subject on an annual basis to massive flooding, which displaced low-income families that had nowhere else to go. Finally, this year, we are raising that project and moving many of those individuals inland at huge cost to the state of Connecticut and huge emotional burden to those families. But every time Long Island Sound floods, it affects low-income families first. Our fishing economy has been fundamentally disrupted. There are no lobsters in Long Island Sound any longer. Why? Because the waters are too warm to be able to sustain much of the sea life that was there years ago. And of course, neglect compounds itself. We're losing salt marshes all along Long Island Sound. Salt marshes that were able to sort of hold and capture carbon dioxide in a way that other resources are not. And so the problem gets worse and worse and worse as we see sea levels rise and we see some of our coastal infrastructure that was able to protect us from global warming disappear. So this is existential to our state, so reliant on a Long Island Sound whose waters are rising, whose temperatures are increasing, and which presents an enormous threat to the majority of Connecticut's population, which lives right on that body of water. So I'm really glad to have with us today somebody who has led the fight on raising awareness about the effects of climate change on Long Island Sound, my great friend from Save the Sound, Kurt Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you to Climate Power for holding this today. I'm just going to tell a quick story about the last 2 weeks in Connecticut. Hurricane Elsa was the earliest recorded Atlantic storm in history, right? Came up the coast, tropical storm when it hits us. It was a rain event, all right? So the area that Chris is describing, which is central southern Connecticut, had 3 to 4 inches of rain. That in itself isn't so bad, but it happened within 3 or 4 hours. It's that deluge effect. The next morning I woke up and the river I live, fortunate enough to live on, the Farm River, was chocolate brown. Chocolate brown. And unfortunately, one of the reasons for that chocolate color was the data that we now have that all the towns in Connecticut have to report sewage spills. They reported in total a minimum of 89 million gallons of raw sewage in mixed polluted stormwater that went into all the rivers and down into the Sound that day. So 89 million, it's a little hard to imagine. I'll help you out. Imagine if Canada sent down 2 super tankers like the old Exxon Valdez. 2 super tankers, 3/4 filled with raw crap in polluted stormwater, and dumped them in our rivers and on the Sound. There would probably be a war that would be created, right? And we've done that to ourselves. We've done it to ourselves because of extreme weather caused by climate change. Couldn't agree more about all the needs for mitigation. And we've done it because our sewer system is so old. It is leaky, right? So all this water comes up and upchucks 89 million gallons in one event. Will the Sound recover? Yeah, probably will in a few weeks. But the impact on people that next day who had to go swimming because it was 95, 90 degrees, right? Had no clue how polluted that water was. The health impacts are extraordinary, right? So I just want to thank Senator Murphy. I want to thank everybody here for pushing a infrastructure bill and set of bills that will take care or start seriously taking care of these problems we're facing today, right? And I'll just mention two things that we'll do in Connecticut and what we need to do. For one, we need to fix the pipes, right? We need to tighten them up and fix the pipes across Bridgeport, New Haven, across Darien, across Norwalk, all the towns in Connecticut, because they're leaking, and they're leaking crap everywhere during these events, all right? And the second thing we need to do is we need to capture the rain when it comes down and hold it in the ground, in those rain gardens and in those bioswales that are part of green infrastructure. We know they work. We helped the city of New Haven install 75, and we know that it is cutting peak floods in New Haven during those times. These are just two things I'll mention. And last thing I'll mention is that the last 2 days in New Haven and New York City, the air quality numbers were up around 140, okay? They were because of the wildfires out west. It's affecting every person in the country. New Yorkers were told, New Haveners were told, Bridgeport kids were told, stay inside, it's too dangerous. Here on the East Coast, my heart goes out to you all dealing with the West. I was a proud resident of Washington State for about 3 years, went to school out there, still feel connected in some way. And if anyone ever told me at that time that Seattle or Bellingham, where I lived, would have 120-degree temperatures, I would have said they were out of their mind. I would have said it was physically impossible. If they told me that there were fires that created their own weather system, where we had to move firemen and firewomen out just to save their lives, I would have said they were out of their mind. But that's the reality, my friends. It's not an existential threat. It is a reality day to day. It's a reality in Connecticut. It's a reality in Oregon. It's a reality in Washington, California, Nevada, Massachusetts, New England, the Midwest. We have to take action now. I want to thank Senator Murphy. I want to thank you all for being leaders in solutions, because we need it today and we need it tomorrow. Thank you.
Kurt, thank you. I'm not sure I can thank you for the visual of the Valdez, but thank you for that very stirring talk. Now, I'd like to turn to Illinois and to a congressman who really is in the weeds on a lot of this policy, and we really appreciate that. So from Illinois' 6th District, Congressman Caston.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you all for coming here. Thank you to my colleagues from the House and Senate. I want to start just with some hard truths. Every single one of us in this town has a twisted arm because we pat ourselves on the back so hard for doing what's politically possible. Our children, our grandchildren don't give a damn. They care that we do what is scientifically necessary. And that is the challenge that we have. We have a moment to do it, but make no mistake, we do not have any more moments. We have exhausted the capacity of the atmosphere to absorb heat, the capacity of the oceans to absorb heat, and we've exhausted all the time we've got on the calendar. We got one play left, folks. Now, the good news is that we have a moment and we have the opportunity to actually do what is necessary. Through the infrastructure bill we're working on in the House and Senate, through the whole of government approach that the White House is taking, not just at those agencies we think of like Department of Energy and EPA, but the Housing Department, the Defense Department, the State Department, our financial regulators, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Happy FERC summer to all of you, however you celebrate. That has the singular ability to make sure that we preferentially deploy those technologies that don't burn fossil fuel to meet our needs, because, oh, by the way, if you don't burn fossil fuel, you don't have to pay for fossil fuel. It's pretty awesome. We can have our cake and eat it too. We have to move on all those fronts right away because we don't have any more moments. We've squandered them. Now, in the Midwest, we are fortunate not to have wildfires. We're fortunate not to be in the hurricane track that you have. But we suffer from an awful lot of global weirding. We go from We go from record summer heat waves. Remember, before Hurricane Katrina, before 9/11, the single largest day of excess mortality, maybe back to the Spanish flu, was the Chicago heat wave in 1995 when over 700 people died, primarily the least among us. So we go from these record summer heat waves to polar vortexes caused by disruptions in Arctic weather patterns caused by melting sea ice, and it's confusing. We go from record high levels of Lake Michigan to record low levels of Lake Michigan in the span of 12 months. It's real confusing for folks, and we are extremely fortunate in Illinois to have, I would suggest to you, the best weatherman in the country. Someone who's been a hero and a celebrity back to 1978 when he started of not only understanding the weather but explaining to people the link between climate and weather. To give you some context, when Congressman Bill Foster and I wanted to do a town hall on climate change, we were sort of lucky. We said, "Can you believe we got Tom Skilling to come and show up?" And then I get a call from Senator Durbin, says, "You got Skilling? Can I come?"
Yeah.
So, and it's important because folks got to understand how these things are linked. And so it's my pleasure to introduce my friend, fellow Chicagoan, Tom Skilling.
Congressman, it's an honor to be here, and thank you for what you do. You have campaigned on the issue. You've put it front and center, and you speak intelligently about it, and we appreciate your leadership in this regard. And it's a pleasure to be here today. I must say, rather intimidating, but I must also say that it's fascinating to hear people on the front line and what's been going on. You know, flying out here, the pall of smoke from Chicago to Washington was just amazing. We look regularly at model simulations of the smoke cloud. My gosh, it covers most of the country. This is stunning, and this goes on year after year after year. I can't even imagine, like the chief, having to breathe the air out there and what's happening to our neighbors in the western United States. You know, as a Chicago meteorologist, I can tell you that the impacts of climate change are and have been on display in our area for decades for all to see in the heart of the country. They've produced disruptions in the economic life of our residents, as well as their health, quality of life, and their well-being. And what's become increasingly concerning is the speed, severity, and comparative unpredictability of these changes. They are way outside what could be by any measure considered the range of natural variability. I've been a meteorologist for over half a century, and the trends that I've observed in and around Chicago offer compelling examples of climate change. As the congressman just mentioned, our region's most deadly natural disaster ever was the July 1995 heat wave. I can only imagine what's happening with this 1,000-year heat wave out to the west in the Pacific Northwest and across Canada. In our area, this disaster took the lives of 739 people, many of whom were unidentified and buried in mass graves. It made headlines around the world. Decades of rising humidities as our atmosphere is warm, combined with temperatures in that heat wave of 106 degrees and 3 nights in which the city temperatures never fell below 80, produced intense heat which turned deadly. The heat index hit 124 degrees. I got a call from a newspaper editor in Arkansas, and he said, you know, people down here are saying, oh, you pansy Midwesterners daring to die in this. And he said, they said, we put up with this kind of heat all the time. And he said, but I think somehow your heat was different, and it is. We have higher moisture levels in the atmosphere because of the agriculture that goes on in our area, transpiring moisture in the air, than occurred down on the Gulf Coast at times. So when you marry intense heat with that kind of moisture, you get heat indices that are deadly. Wild weather swings are the calling cards of climate change, or what researchers at Argonne National Laboratory prefer to call climate disruption. In Chicago and across the Midwest, our wets are getting wetter, our dries are getting drier as temperatures move from one extreme to the next. Across the Midwest, extreme rains for more than half a century have been increasing as the climate warms. 5 of our region's all-time wettest years have occurred since 2000, 2 of them in just the last 3 years. The most recent 5 years have been the wettest on record across the Great Lakes region. Instances of flooding across the nation's heartland have grown more severe and more frequent. Changes in Great Lakes water levels, as the congressman mentioned, that took decades to occur in the past are occurring in years or even shorter time frames. Flooding on Chicago area rivers has occurred with a frequency which is absolutely unfamiliar to our residents. Our reporters come back to the station with sound bites from folks forced from their homes 3 and 4 times in their lifetime, saying they've never seen anything like that, nor have their predecessors. 2-inch plus rains are up 46%. Lake Michigan levels, and the folks at the New York Times did an amazing analysis of this in a recent article. Water levels on Lake Michigan have shifted stunningly, varying 6 feet in just the past 7 years, from record highs in 1986 to record lows in 2013, back to record highs again in 2020. They're down a bit now, but we're still above the average. And the future of lake levels is uncertain. They've always varied, but never this quickly and this sharply, which, like climate change that's occurring at a rate that we've never seen in human existence on the planet, is going at that rate too. Precipitation and evaporation drive shifts in lake level swings. We have 20% of the world's fresh water in the Great Lakes. We depend on this for recreation and for our water supply, so this is pretty amazing. Winters in Chicago have warmed 3.6 degrees, much of that at night. Springs by 3.4 degrees. Summers are up 2.1 degrees, much of that at night. And autumn temperatures are up 2.4 degrees over the past several decades. Communities lining Lake Michigan, including the city of Chicago, are on the hook now for an estimated $2 billion in damages to infrastructure, including roads and homes, which have literally collapsed into the lakes because of historically high water. Beaches have disappeared, reappeared, and then disappeared again. The impact on the tourism industry as boat slips appear and disappear, the bedrock of the economies of so many lakeside communities across the Midwest, has been devastated. And in the city of Chicago and up and down our shoreline, wave action on the Great Lakes at times of high water has seriously damaged the shorelines. We have waves that are 20 feet high that come in on these autumn and spring storms there. And when you've got lake levels that are elevated, the flooding is amazing. Raw sewage releases have become necessary from Chicago into Lake Michigan during more extreme rain events, a nightmare for the 30 million people who depend on the Great Lakes for their source of water. The Midwest is the breadbasket of the world, providing 25% of the world's corn, soybeans, and grains. Yet our farmers, as recently as 2019, were unable to get into their fields because of excessive rainfall until June, which reduced their yields. 2/3 of the Midwest land is devoted to agriculture. 65% of our country's corn and soybeans are grown there. 1993 saw the entire state of Iowa referred to as the 6th Great Lake because of standing water. It's ironic that the same weather pattern and shifts due to climate change that are causing the fires and drought in the West, along with forest management issues and all, lead to us getting wet. So we are at the other end of the meteorological spectrum. Underscoring the increasingly wide swings in precipitation, the Mississippi River has undergone serious flooding in 2002, 2008, 2011, 2016, 2017, 18, and 19, and 2019 saw that vast waterway in a state of flood for 235 consecutive days, the most on record since records began in the 1800s. Fleas, ticks, and the spread of Lyme disease are up, as are the spread of West Nile virus as we turn wetter and warmer. And while tornado numbers haven't changed, they've even dropped in some instances, the earliest and latest major tornadoes on record in and around the Chicago area since detailed records began in 1950 have occurred. We had the deadly Rochelle-Fairdale twister of April 2016 on the early end of the spectrum. And Washington, Illinois, outside Peoria, Illinois, was devastated by an EF4 tornado in November. It's amazing. And then, of course, a swath of terrain from eastern Iowa, eastern Nebraska, across Iowa, northern Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio was decimated by the most damaging and expensive thunderstorm complex, one of these so-called derechos, that swept the area last August. $7.5 billion in damage, 140-mile-per-hour wind gusts in Iowa, 100-mile-an-hour gusts in northern Illinois. It was like an inland hurricane. Taxpayers have been funding increasingly numerous and expensive severe weather and climate disasters of $1 billion or more since NOAA, the parent agency of the National Weather Service, kept tabs on this in 1980. So climate change is real, and we in the nation's heartland have and are experiencing it, and our hearts go out to our neighbors in the West as we look at these orange sunrises and sunsets that are the subject of many pictures from viewers. They're stunning to see, tragic when you realize where that smoke is coming from. Thank you for allowing me to be a member of this group. This is important work that you're doing. Thank you. And Congressman, a pleasure to be here with you.
And thank you so much for what you're doing to educate viewers. That's really how we get the message out. Unfortunately, Congressman McEachin could not be here with us today in D.C. as originally planned, but he still deserves an enormous shout out for being a champion on climate action and especially environmental justice. As you've heard, these extreme weather events don't affect everyone equally. Communities of color, low and middle income communities, and other vulnerable groups, too, often bear the brunt of all of the extreme weather. Congressman McEachin has been fighting hard to change that through his 100% Clean Economy Act last Congress and his many, many other ongoing efforts. Rep. McEachin is fighting to deliver environmental justice for all. So on his behalf, I am really honored to be able to introduce Lavisha Allen Rollins of the Women's Earth Alliance. Lavisha, over to you to bring us home.
Thank you. I want to thank Congressman McEachin for having me and the invitation to attend such an important event. Good morning to all the representatives present, the Climate Power Organization, my esteemed panelists, everyone in attendance. I say thank you for having me. My name is Lavisha Allen Rollins, a member of the 2020 Women's Earth Alliance Accelerator Program and co-founder and co-director of C5, which stands for Concerned Citizens of Charles City County, a nonprofit group located in Charles City, Virginia, that supports the community of Charles City regarding environmental, economic, cultural history, and social injustices. It is indeed an honor and privilege to speak on the impacts climate change has presented to the state of Virginia. With much of my work with C5 and Women's Earth Alliance, we have banded with many organizations and have worked with many residents firsthand on the impacts climate change has in Virginia. The impacts span from severe storms, high water temperatures, sea level rise, salt water infiltration, increases in daily temperatures, and agricultural impacts. With many of these issues being intertwined, the concerns of climate change are present and increasing. I will start with Norfolk, Virginia. Sea level rise is currently threatening this city with flooding from rainfalls and with the increase of storms. A research team from Hampton University, led by Professor Mason Andrews and students of Hampton University, I'm proudly an alumni of Hampton, are developing ways to strategically work to assist with the impacts of sea level in Norfolk. They are currently working with the National Science Foundation to develop a strategic plan to integrate multidisciplinary teams on ways to combat sea level rise. The sea level is said to rise 1 inch every 4 years, which projects Norfolk to be underwater within my children's lifetime, which leads to another issue, which is salt intrusion. With the sea level rising, salt will start to infiltrate our local rivers, streams, and soil. With areas like Norfolk, a perfect storm, as some call it, can cause massive flooding, leading to salt water being presented in local streams and rivers in Virginia. This gets into our soils that are impacted by the flooding, which can create issues for local agriculture due to salty soil. An increase in daily temperature will increase the health impacts of residents who have respiratory issues, such as asthma, especially for minority residents, elderly residents, and children. With many hot areas, as they're called, in communities that lack trees and shade, high levels of CO2, smog, and particulate matter from local industrial plants are attributing to growing health concerns for residents in urban areas. In rural areas, methane emissions from landfills are creating issues for many residents, and the leachate from landfills and toxic developments being proposed in rural minority communities are adding to the health impact and causes of climate change. Many local residents of Charles City County are developing cancer, heart disease, autoimmune diseases, and the causes are not known why. Climate impacts ultimately lead to health impacts, which lead to environmental injustices due to many of these pollutants developments being in poor minority areas. Climate change and environmental justice are becoming interrelated by the impacts that are evolving from each issue. Bringing awareness to the impacts of climate change will also bring awareness of all issues that will be heightened by not addressing this crisis now. As we know by working with impacted communities, no matter which state we are in, ultimately climate change impacts all of us. Right now, we have an opportunity to listen to our climate and work to stop the effects that are attributing to climate change. This change will have to start with everyone, residents, organizations, energy companies, political leaders, working to find efficient ways and different ways to promote and produce energy and also work to stop climate change. As I was once told, as a little country girl growing up in a small county, Charles City County, Virginia, in a garden grown by my grandparents, I was told the earth provides for us as long as we protect and provide for the earth. As we eat, drink, develop new technologies, and explore the earth, let's be reminded that each day it pours into us by providing food, water, and stable ground, and it expects us to protect and preserve it so that it can continue to provide for us and our children. It's time we recognize, reconcile, and restore the earth. Let's do our part to address climate change collaboratively so that we can live collectively here on Earth for not only us, but our children. Thank you.
Lakeisha, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for staying with us this morning. May these stories all be carried from here across the street to the floor and halls of Congress so that we can have action in the weeks ahead that meets the moment and really addresses the climate crisis. Thank you all and have a good day.